in the 12th chapter, as we come to it here in a few minutes, that he lays it out to the layperson rather than speaking as a priest would, and therefore it's a lot easier to understand if you just pay attention and watch it closely. So, a repeat of the law, Moses will be gone back to the Father less than 30 days after this book of Deuteronomy was written, and so he's giving it his final recap, if you would, and I find that very interesting. He had completed in chapter 11 in the last lecture with God's word in verse 36, where God says, hey, I want your love, but I'm going to give you a choice. I'm going to put before you this day a blessing and a curse. And it's up to you, beloved, whether you choose the blessing or the curse. He's made it very simple in the 10th chapter, what he requires of you. And it's something you never want to forget. And what in verse 12 of chapter 10, let's read it before we even begin today. We did in the last lecture. And now, Israel, what doth the Lord thy God require of thee but to fear the Lord thy God, to walk in all his ways, and to love him? That's very important. And to serve the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul. In other words, he is your Father. He's number one in your life. And that's what he requires. So if you choose the curse, that's your business. And if you like that sort of thing, hey, jump in. But I guarantee you the water's hot. So we'd covered down to the 29th verse, and we're still in the subject of the curse and the blessings. Now, there are, in verse 27 and 28, two huge ifs. And those ifs define what places you under the curse or under the blessing. So don't ever forget it. Verse 29, we pick up there, we go with it. And it shall come to pass, when the Lord thy God hath brought thee in unto the land whither thou goest to possess it, that thou shalt put the blessings upon Mount Gerizim, that means cuttings, and the curse upon Mount Ebal. Now, Mount Ebal is a bald mountain. There's nothing there. I mean, not even the wild donkeys know better than to go there trying to pick something up, but a lot of people haven't got any more sense than that. They'll take the cursings, and there's no food there. Now, what is he saying here? You'll get the very richest of cuttings of the truth. That means to partake of, if you choose the blessings. But if you go up on that bald knob all by yourself, choosing the cursings, there's no food for thought. God's certainly not going to feed you. And I'm talking about truth now, not food itself. I'm talking about your mind. You might as well seal it off because you're finished until you have a big change of heart. So again, don't try to blame someone else. I mean, you know, you people will say, well, if my daddy hadn't done this, or if my mama hadn't always... No, don't do that. If your boss or your uncle or the government. No, it's you make the choice. You make the final choice. It's your bed. You sleep in it. The only person that can change it is you. So remember that. It's like if someone, example, decides they want to quit drinking. You can talk to them, preach to them, lay down the law, pick up the law, until they themselves within their own heart and mind decide they want to quit. They're not going to. So each person makes their own bed. And I have if you ever want to just take a short trip to the truth rather than let someone con you or anything else, listening to sob stories, your life, you made the choice, hey, either fix it or enjoy it, one or the other. The choice is blessings or cursings. God makes that very clear, and I think that the analogy of Gerizim and Ebal make it very clear. Cuttings of the finest of alfalfa to eat, or an old bald knob that a wild donkey can starve to death on. Which will you take? Verse 30. Are they not on the other side Jordan, by the way where the sun goeth down in the land of the Canaanites? which dwell in the campaign over against Gilgal. That's to say, beside the plains of Moreh. Now, I kind of like this place, Moreh. It's where my name, Murray, comes from, and it means teacher. And I guess I fell into my lot pretty well there because I try to teach. Gilgal means kind of rolling, all right? But Moreh, and this is the proper pronunciation, quite frankly, in Latin for Murray is Moreh, all right? Verse 31. Not that that has anything to do with one thing or the other, but the word does mean teacher, so sharpen up. That's what he's telling you here. The law or the curse, I mean, God's blessings or the curse, it's yours. 31, for ye shall pass over Jordan to go in to possess the land which the Lord your God giveth you, and you shall possess it and dwell therein. You're going to. 32, and ye shall observe to do all the statutes and judgments which I set before you this day, if you want the blessings. You see, before you can please God and serve Him, you've got to know what it is He wants. Or you're playing guessing games. Hey, if you've been in this old world around for a while, you find out you don't try to make it playing guessing games, or somebody's going to end up getting hurt. You must know what you're doing, and you must be very sincere in how you do it. And it's like God would have said back in the 13th verse of this chapter we just finished, and it shall come to pass if ye shall hearken diligently unto my commandments which I command you this day, to love the Lord your God and to serve Him with all your heart and with all your soul. You'll be blessed. That's what your Father wants from you, is your love. He created you for His pleasure. And how it does please Him when one of His little ones does well. Chapter 12, this is, let's title this kind of the laws of the land. We're going to be covering health food laws. We'll cover them in more depth in a later time, and I'll probably a rule of the thumb is this, and we'll say it before we go into it, that the difference in meats that are edible to you with God's blessings and good health, that's what it's about, is scavenger and non-scavenger. God never expected you to put a scavenger on your table for food. Why? It'll make you sick. Is it a sin? Well, it's a sin to the flesh. It will make you ill. It will make you sick. Now, if you want to be sick, hey, again, it's your choice. I learned a long time ago, you can't force people to believe and or do anything. But at least as a teacher, I must tell you what's going to happen to you if you partake of it. You're going to be sicker than a dog at times. Or you can be healthy. Now, we have a lot of things that enter into that, and there are exceptions to every rule. But basically, if you start your children out young on God's food laws, well, you're going to have healthy children, basically. And again, there are exceptions to every rule because of the pollutions and so on and so forth that we have in this world. Okay, having said that, kind of the laws of the land, and we will touch on some of the various statutes and ordinances so that you kind of know which are done away with and which aren't in this particular chapter. We'll just brush it. We'll get deeper later on. Chapter 12, verse 1, it reads, These are the statutes and the judgments which ye shall observe to do in the land, which the Lord God of thy fathers giveth thee to possess it all the days that ye live upon the earth. And that law still remains. It's still today, if you want to be blessed, that is to say. Now, do I have to do it? No, you don't have to. You can take the cursings. They're all yours, friend. And you got lots of company. Verse 2. Ye shall utterly destroy all the places wherein the nations which ye have possessed, which ye shall possess, serve their gods, upon the high mountains and upon the hills and under every green tree. You're going to take all those false religions and denominations and kick them off the hill. Now that's out of your mind, all right? That's God is jealous. He doesn't like competition, but mainly it's for their purpose and their blessings. Why? Well, take old Achan, who, boy, oh man, he fell in love with that Babylonian priest robe. Whew, I mean, now, you know, that was fancy. He even catch the lady's eyes, I would suppose, one of the reasons he wanted it. He took it, and he was supposed to burn it. It brought about his death. And evidently his family liked it pretty well, too, and the same happened, verse 3. And ye shall overthrow their altars, and break their pillars, and burn their groves with fire, and ye shall hew down the graven images of their gods, and destroy the names of them out of that place. God doesn't like his own, or those that at least claim to know the truth, to be using other names and so on and so forth that desecrate a real house of God. Now, many people might say, well, I understand that you know the sacred name. Yes, I do. Do you use it? Yes, I do. I certainly use it in prayer. But I am a teacher, and a teacher uses the names because it's not a sin to use the name if you're speaking that language, but it doesn't hurt as you go along, as a good teacher would, to teach people to use the name. That's the way you teach. Otherwise, you can be a heretic, and most of the people that really are a heretic on that various subject, they don't spell the name right and don't know it anyway. It's locked in the Hebrew manuscripts in the book of Esther so that no one can make a mistake. Verse 4, and it reads, ye shall not do so unto the Lord your God. That is to say, you don't just pick a place and decide, I'm going to build an altar here to God. If God wants an altar, he'll tell you. All right? You don't just go out in the woods somewhere and put up an altar to God. Why? Verse 5. But unto the place which the Lord your God shall choose out of all your tribes to put his name there, even unto his habitation shall ye seek, and thither thou shalt come. Now, there'll be a provision here in a moment for those that are too far away. But God intends to regulate his house. And it's real easy to tell a real house of God, a real church, if you choose more comfortably to be called church. It's real simple. God's word is taught there, not man's and not traditions. And God's blessings will be upon that house. And it will bless all those that come in contact. It will change lives because people choose blessings rather than the curse. It's up to you. It's all your call. God, you can always tell when you're in a true house of God. No one has to tell you. Verse 6, and thither ye shall bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices. Those offerings, burnt offerings, were replaced on the cross. The sacrifices are your loved offerings. That's your love he wants you to bring to that house, to sacrifice love rather than burnt animals. And your tithes, that still remains where you're taught, and heave offerings of your hand, and your vows and your free will offerings, and the firstlings of your herd and of your flocks. The law still not much in agriculture anymore, but you can basically sort that one out for yourself. Verse 7, and there ye shall eat before the Lord your God, and ye shall rejoice in all that ye put your hand unto, ye and your households, wherein the Lord thy God hath blessed thee. Now understand, he's talking here to the common people, to the lay persons. He's not talking to the priest. Verse 8, Ye shall not do after all the things that we do here this day. Every man whatsoever is right in his own eyes. In other words, while they were wandering in the wilderness, they could not carry out with a house that was called Bethel, or Jerusalem, God's house, the city of peace, or Bethel, the house of God. But in the wilderness, he said, you're not going to do like we do here. We kind of get by best we can. Well, that still kind of applies a little bit today, because there are so few really true houses of God. Sometimes you have to do what's right in your own eyes. Verse 9. For ye are not as yet come to the rest and to the inheritance which the Lord your God giveth you. In other words, you're still a wanderer to a degree. Verse 10. But when you go over Jordan and dwell in the land which the Lord your God giveth you to inherit, it's yours, and when he giveth you rest from all your enemies round about, so that ye dwell in safety, when he gets all that taken care of for you, verse 11, then there shall be a place which the Lord your God shall choose to cause his name to dwell there. Thither shall ye bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings, and your sacrifices, your tithes, and the heave offering of your hand, and all your choice vows which ye vow unto the Lord. And if you do make a vow to the Lord, make certain that you have one of his houses before you fulfill that vow, or it probably won't go to God. So sometimes it's best if you don't make a vow, all right? That's up to you. That's a very personal thing. Will God forgive me if I break my vow? Well, it's not the unforgivable sin, so the answer naturally is yes. But I think this still is true to this day, that God chooses his own places, because he chooses those which were pre-chosen, preordained, pre-elected before the foundations of the world. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if you're in a real house, God still holds that promise, and it is true. Verse 12. And ye shall rejoice before the Lord your God, ye and your sons and your daughters, and your men servants and your maid servants, and the Levite that is within your gates, for as much as he hath no part nor inheritance with you. In other words, the Levitical priesthood had no inheritance. God was their inheritance. They were supposed to carry his part, and as the law would divide it up, they had a part of that. 13. Take heed to thyself that thou offer not thy burnt offerings in every place that thou seest. In other words, be careful where you go to church. I suppose I could update that to that. Be careful where you go to church. And be careful where you put your love sacrifice, that is to say your love for God, that you truly give it to God and not feel like you have to have a go-between, because you don't. You are your Father's child, and he wants to hear it from you, all right? Verse 14. But in the place which the Lord shall choose in one of thy tribes, there thou shalt offer thy burnt offerings, and there thou shalt do all that I command thee. And naturally, the burnt offerings were done away with Christ. In other words, so the update is what then? Wherever God decides to send the Son and the Holy Spirit, even to this day, God will do the choosing. And I think that any Christian that has discernment can walk into a house and know whether it's a house of God that's following blessings or if it's going the other way. It isn't difficult. 15. Notwithstanding, thou mayest kill and eat flesh in all thy gates. Whatsoever thy soul lusteth after, whatever you get a craving for, that's what this means, all right? You ever get a craving for a certain kind of food? Of course you do. Well, that's what this means. The word lusteth probably is a little, well, be that as it may. I think it's better translated craving. According to the blessing of the Lord thy God, which he hath given thee, the unclean and the clean may eat thereof, as of the roebuck and as of the hart. Now, or gazelle, what this is saying here, you could never offer a roebuck, a deer, let's call them a deer because that's what they were. You couldn't offer that as a sacrifice to God. Do you know why? Well, because it's wild. It's God's already. God, as he reigned upon the open fields, the roebuck, is already God's property. He allows you to hunt and to take them, and then it's all right to eat them. They're clean. But you can't offer it as a sacrifice. But now I want very clearly, I want to make it very clear, rather, better said. What he means here by the clean and the unclean may eat of it. When it comes supper time, you're going to have, he's not talking about unclean foods that you are to eat, but he's talking about eaters that are unclean. Like maybe someone had a brother that was killed or something, and he touched a dead body. And he would be unclean for a certain period of time, but he can still eat. All right, let him eat with you. After he once touches it, then you don't touch it, and so forth. And I think that God here shows you, as it stated earlier, you do the best that you can and with what's right in your mind. That sometimes we have to take these things and do the best we can with what's right in your mind, according to the decision made by having your mind primed and packed with God's thoughts and his letter. That you'll probably always come up with a right decision. So he said, hey, when it comes chow time, don't let the unclean and the clean, that's to say those that are spiritually unclean, clean, eat at the same time. But the roebuck wasn't a sacrificial animal. 16, only ye shall not eat the blood. You shall pour it upon the earth as water. This was a point of health. And it's still very unhealthy to this day. But now that we have freezers and everything, in other words, the way you kill the animal is to bleed it. And you get rid of the blood. Now, before there was refrigeration and this sort of thing, I mean, it didn't take but hours till the effects of that is putrid would immediately take over if the blood was still in the flesh. And without refrigeration, it wasn't long after that till it would anyway. But it's a thing of health. Now, some people will take this and say, well, my word, you can never have a blood transfusion. That's not what it's talking about. These are the laws of the land to the common people. And I call all of us the common people aside from the priesthood. Do you understand what I'm saying? It is the way you are to live. And sometimes you have to make that call. And if you make it asking his wisdom, he's going to honor it pretty well. But this means that anything that is not bled properly before you partake of it, even if it's a clean animal, it's not good for you. Verse 17, thou mayest not eat within thy gates the tithe of thy corn or of thy wine. Now notice the difference. Now what are we talking about? The tithe of your corn and wine. Or of thy oil, or the firstlings of thy herds, or of thy flock, nor any of thy vows which thou vowest, nor thy free will offerings, or heave offerings of thine hand. In other words, you can eat God's part. Listen carefully, 18. But thou must eat them before the Lord thy God in the place which the Lord thy God shall choose. Thou and thy son and thy daughter and thy manservant and thy maidservant and the Levite that is within thy gates, and thou shalt rejoice before the Lord thy God in all that thou puttest thine hands unto. And of course this goes into a point of law that I choose not to go to at this time, that part that was God's. Well, namely, let's take part that's God's is the fat. God says, I don't want you eating the fat. It's not healthy for you. The fat belongs to me. So one of the first things that will happen to you if you get ill today, they'll say, leave fat alone. Don't take in too much fat. Okay? So finally man catches up, does he not? Verse 19. Take heed to thyself that thou forsake not the Levite as long as thou livest upon the earth. In other words, you always take care of that one that was responsible for keeping the commandments in good shape. 20. When the Lord thy God shall enlarge thy border, when you get to be a bigger country, as he hath promised thee, and thou shalt say, I will eat flesh, because thy soul longeth to eat flesh. In other words, you got a hankering for it, all right? Thou mayest eat flesh whatsoever thy soul lusteth after, or has a craving for. You see, now, does that make God a bad person? And again, he's not telling you it's all right to eat scavengers. He only created certain foods to be partaken of. And I can hear it right now, some of these revolving revs saying, well, apparently he's never read 1 Timothy chapter 4. Because it says there, never let a man judge you in your meat. It also says never let a man judge you in your marriage, all right? But what does it say about this meat thing? They like to quote verse 4, and they just read right over verse 3. It says, never let a man judge you about the meat you partaken of those things God created to be received. He didn't create the scavenger to be received. And that's what he's telling you here, is what can be received and what can't. So, I don't know where the art of reading with understanding has gone to. It's simple enough that a child can read it and understand it, but some yo-yo that's primed up with traditions has great difficulty making common sense out of the simplicity in which Christ taught. It's kind of sad, isn't it? Verse 21. If the place which the Lord thy God hath chosen to put his name there be too far from thee, then thou shalt kill of thy herd and of thy flock, which the Lord hath given thee, as I have commanded thee, and thou shalt eat in thy gates whatsoever thy soul lusteth after, or has a hankering for. So you see, God isn't difficult. Listen carefully, 22. Even as the roebuck and the hart is eaten, so thou shalt eat them. The unclean and the clean shall eat of them alike. Now again, the clean and the unclean, there would be some people that says right there you could eat the clean and the unclean both. No, that's not what it said. It said the eaters can eat the clean, but the eaters can be clean or unclean spiritually and partake of it. Father is very gracious, and his parameters that he sets on our behavior are really pretty simple to follow. Verse 23. Only be sure that thou eat not the blood, for the blood is the life, and thou mayest not eat the life with the flesh. And naturally it is true that it is the blood itself that carries the oxygen and the properties themselves, the metabolism carried through them, that nourishes and feeds the body, that keeps it alive. and you're not supposed to eat something that's alive. So it's very important that an animal be bled properly. Some might say, well, isn't that a ritual? Well, not necessarily. It is simply the cleansing of the meat. And has nothing, I repeat again, it has nothing to do with a blood transfusion or anything else. It just simply means meat will spoil rapidly and make you sick. 24, thou shalt not eat it. Thou shalt pour it upon the earth as water. 25, thou shalt not eat it, that it may go well with thee, and with thy children after thee, when thou shalt do that which is right in the sight of the Lord. And go well with you what? You won't get sick. You'll be healthy. Your children will be healthy. 26, only thy holy things which thou hast and thy vows thou shalt take and go unto the place which the Lord shall choose. God always has a place for everybody. And you know something? I think sometimes it's a secluded place in the country that is a special place by a stream or on a mountaintop. It can be. Doesn't have to be a church building. Special place for one to pray, to communicate with the Father, that enriches their life simply by meditating one-on-one with the Father. But as far as the vows, meaning in the pay of the teacher, God will have houses, and especially, that's so simple I choose not to even explain it any further. 27, and thou shalt offer thy burnt offerings, which now is your love for God. Christ gave that offering for one and all times. The flesh and the blood upon the altar of the Lord thy God, and the blood of thy sacrifices shall be poured out upon the altar of the Lord thy God, and thou shalt eat the flesh. And verse 28 to complete. Observe and hear all these words which I command thee, that it may go well with thee and with thy children after thee forever. In other words, that you'll simply be healthy. These are health laws. When thou doest that which is good and right in the sight of the Lord thy God. Now that was a very simple brush over of God's health laws. And we'll be going into them more in depth, so hang on as we go through this book. But that'll give you kind of we'll cultivate a little spot of ground here and get ready to plant the deeper seeds as we move along. Judgment usually had to do with the issues of morality. That was always done in the gate, and it was usually done by someone that knew God's law quite lengthy and could judge between two after hearing both sides of the story, so on and so forth, as laws would apply. Here you have those health laws. Health laws are not a sin like to hell, but it's a sin to the flesh, because you're going to be sick if you don't follow them as best you can. And the good Father alone only knows, in this polluted world today, where we poison ourselves on every corner, by that I mean every time you turn a corner there's more pollution. Certainly we have illness, but it does help to do it His way. Don't miss the next lecture.